oh, my dad yelled at me and I remember this memory and I never felt the same about myself after that. But that energy could be like a time capsule in the body and then it's stuck. And maybe it's stuck in the liver. Like even from an organ point of view, it could actually be disrupting liver function.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mark Groves Podcast. Today, I am joined by Dr. Kevin Preston, doctor of Chinese medicine, facilitator, retreat runner, woods lover. Tree lover, I think it's
tree lover.
Tree lover.
I do hug
hugger.
trees occasionally.
Dude, me too. When I'm feeling it, I'm like, I think you get electrons from hugging trees, right? That's like
It'll
one of
shift the energy in your body, no doubt. You think about those deep roots, it just grounds all that energy in your own body.
I mean, people know that on an energetic level. Like, we know that when we're in nature, you feel better, just like all the data on forest bathing, which when I think about forest bathing, I instantly am like, I think of Tofino or the
Tofino.
west coast of the U.S. too, like Washington, just the rainforest. You know, I don't think of forest bathing in the desert here in Vegas. We're recording
not
in
so
Vegas.
many trees available.
No, if you hug a cactus, you're fucked. Your energy does not get better. I wanted to have you on to discuss about what goes on in our life, like the relationships we have, things like that, how that correlates to the energies in our body, our heart, and then also how that physiologically shows up, not just in maybe symptomatic experiences, but also because I know you in your work, it's not just like symptoms. You go to the depths of the cellular experience. And I think that's why the idea of doctor of Chinese medicine is, people probably think of acupuncture or something like that.
Yeah, acupuncture. And many times over the years, this has happened where somebody comes in and they're like, where's the doctor? And I'm standing there
You're
like,
hey,
I know I'm not an old Chinese guy, because that's what they tell me is like, you're not an old Chinese guy. I'm like, yes, thank you. True. And I've always been fascinated by the way the body works, though, and trying to understand, where does illness actually come from?
Yeah, what made you be so passionate about it?
Injury. Yeah, a lot of injuries. Played hockey.
Good
Prairie,
Canadian. I like a good prairie
Canadian.
Yeah.
Lots of hockey injuries, blew my knee out, tons, had surgeries, and I got acupuncture after surgery, and it worked amazing. And I'm a very curious person as well. And so I just remember thinking, what happened there? How did that take away the swelling and the pain? And just, I recovered way ahead of schedule. And my surgeon on the follow-up was like, I don't know what you've been doing, but keep doing it. You're twice as far along the line as anybody I've seen. Yeah, I started reading books, just got more and more curious. The more books I read about Chinese medicine, the more interested I became. And it just made sense to me that you would always try and find the root source of what's going on in somebody's body, like what's that core pattern. And something really clicked for me that it just seemed very practical. Like, of course we would do that. Of course we would try and find out, if these 10 patients have migraines, the reason each one has a migraine, totally different.
Yeah.
And you would never do the same treatment for each of them, because the mechanism that created that pattern is going to be different. Maybe somebody had 10 concussions. You're going to treat that differently. Maybe somebody's, anemic or something. You're not going to give them the same stuff. So that always made a lot of sense to me of, let's individualize it and then get down to that deep area and solve it.
It seems like that's a very logical, when I think
Seemed
of Western
logical to
medicine,
me.
right? I mean, I used to be in the pharma industry for a long time, and I never questioned when I sold, let's say, an antihypertensive. I never questioned like the root cause of hypertension. I knew the physiological mechanism of hypertension and what might lead to that, but I never really thought even of cholesterol or something like that, which cholesterol is a whole other story of deception. But when you started to dive deeper into this, when you got acupuncture for the first time, because I'm thinking like, you're a young guy in Rimbey, Alberta, right?
Yeah.
Like, did you get acupuncture in Rimbey, Alberta? Like,
no, it was Red Deer, a much bigger place.
Yeah, exactly. So was it challenging to your already held beliefs, or like what you'd been raised to think about medicine or the management of symptoms?
I don't think I thought about it too much at the time. And I was in science at the time. My mom was a nurse, so I kind of grew up more on the Western medicine side of things. Was interested in working with animals, kind of almost went into vet medicine as a direction. And I just wanted something that worked. Like, my knee was in huge amount of pain. It was very swollen. And we did some needling on it.
Get me back to hockey.
Yeah, pretty much like, the practical element of, I want this to feel better. How can we do that? sure, I'm up for trying anything. I've always been very open and very curious. And I remember after that first treatment, it literally just took the swelling down in like 15 minutes.
Wow.
And it wasn't as hot to the touch. It wasn't as red. And I remember looking down thinking, I can see part of my kneecap again. I couldn't when I was laying
I know
here because
that
it was
feeling.
so swollen. What is that?
Yeah.
And then feeling that, I guess, when I look back now, that energetic pull of like, this is trying to show you something about your life, even though I didn't know it at the time, but like follow that up. And then, yeah, getting books and asking about it and then starting to feel that deeper feeling. I think I need to change gears here. I think I need to change directions. What if I went and learned about that? And I think a lot of people thought I was crazy, especially from where I grew up.
You're like, hey, I'm going to be a doctor of Chinese medicine. And they're like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, a lot of questions and good questions, I think, because I didn't actually really know what I was getting into, but I felt like I needed to go and explore and then I would know.
I love how we experience an intervention like that or something, because I think so many people, like for people listening, they go through a health issue. I think very common now is things like autoimmune. There's no answer in the healthcare world in allopathic medicine. Things like irritable bowel syndrome too. It's like there's something. This is a diagnosis of exclusion. And there's not like they're not going to the center of what is actually causing this. And I remember when I was a rep selling, the first drug I ever sold was for irritable bowel syndrome, but it was like the first one to be introduced for irritable bowel constipation. And I remember there being information that shared that like irritable bowel was correlated to, there were studies showing correlation to childhood abuse.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, gosh, yeah, logically that makes so much sense that your system gets stuck in fight, flight, freeze, that you're not thinking about digestion when you're thinking about survival, and nervous systems being sort of stuck in that space. But at the time, that was actually data that if someone wanted to present it, they were heavily criticized. And now I look back and I think, oh my Lord, like that's actually what needed to be resolved. And in the context of people experiencing having to go on their own journey to find an answer, which you
Yes.
must get a lot of that. Like people with the traditional systems, quote unquote, traditional being used in
Yeah.
the colonized Western way, now considered normal, don't give them an answer. And they're desperate to find something. And then they find something like Chinese medicine, or they find something like functional medicine or naturopathic or acupuncture, and they find resolve. And then they're like, I got to do this and I got to give this gift to the rest of the world. I just love the serendipity of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a couple of things there. The desperation is pretty high right now. And a lot of patients I've worked with over the years, they've pretty much lost hope by the time they would see me. I see a lot of people now more early stage, but a lot of times they have seen literally 50 doctors, sometimes 60 doctors. And I'm asking them, like, what are you talking about? You've seen 60 doctors? You must be exaggerating. And they start telling me the story of
They've got their file.
how it
That's the
began. And like,
standard,
here's
right?
my encyclopedia of
Yeah.
everything that I've been through. But they often have lost hope. And usually what I begin with is a conversation is, tell me what's going on. And then I often ask, what do you think is at the root here? And I realize that most of the time they've never been asked that.
No.
And they say, well, I think there was this time, I was traveling, I got food poisoning, but that was like 15 years ago. I told my doctors and all of them said, no, it couldn't be that. It's, that's way in the past. That'll be resolved. And I'll ask them, but do you think that? And they're like, yeah, I was never the same after that. And then we'll dive in deeper with a lot of the stuff that I do and toxicity testing and get into the root issue. And I'll find things that have been in the body for decades. And so I suppose I've developed a bit of a reputation for being like psychic or medically intuitive or something. And, maybe on some days it's more like that. But I've been reading patterns for a long time. And when you read patterns thousands of times, there'll be something in somebody's past where I'm looking for that. When did it shift? What was that? Oh, my dad yelled at me and I remember this memory and I never felt the same about myself after that. And it might take us a little bit to get down to these root issues, but that energy could be like a time capsule in the body and then it's stuck. And maybe it's stuck in the liver. Like even from an organ point of view, it could actually be disrupting liver function. But it's a memory of frustration, stress, anger, something like that. It gets stuck in the organs. And we never think of them that way because we weren't taught to think of them that way.
My God, no. Imagine, I'm sure there's people listening who are like, okay, my dad yelled at me when I'm 3 and now my liver's not functioning as well. Can you talk about how that pathway, like how that works? Because When I read someone's, let's say their application for like a retreat or when I coach one-on-one, I could immediately see the patterns of language too.
Yeah.
And if I knew because they also would fill out some of their history, I could see what they chose, right? And there was so many, because after you've seen thousands of things, you're like, oh, that word
Hmm.
is so telling, that sentence, that statement. So can you, yeah, maybe speak to what happens in the body physiologically that leads to something like impacting liver function at 3 or whatever, 5 or whatever?
Yeah. Well, in Chinese medicine theory, all the organs have a connected emotion. So the liver, that's more anger, frustration, stress, which makes the liver one of the hardest working organs, especially in our modern world. A lot of stress is rampant. That energy will start to get stuck in the liver. And what it does,
Interesting.
though, is it can start affecting actually blood flow to the liver and then the ability of the liver to detox and clear itself out. So if you have somebody that's holding a huge amount of frustration, a lot of anger, repressed anger, because emotions are not bad, we need them.
Right.
But if they're not expressed properly or they're stuck in the body or they're really suppressed over a long period of time, it'll actually affect the organ itself. And so our liver
Interesting.
is meant to detox, clear toxins, works with cholesterol and blood pressure, among other things. And its design is to govern smooth flow of energy and emotions through the body from a Chinese medicine point of view.
So it's like a detoxifier of all things.
All things,
Interesting.
emotions,
Makes
everything
sense.
else. So if that filter gets stuck, you're going to start having issues. It's like an engine in a vehicle or something. You get a filter that's clogged up, things start backing up through the rest of the body. So the spleen, for example, that's more obsessive thinking, contemplation, like busy mind. The lungs is more grief and sadness.
Mm.
And the kidneys is more fear. So when I'm working with somebody, I read their intake form or we're chatting. I am listening to their words. I'm watching how they sit, how they talk, what their physiology, what their energy is saying. And I'll get a sense of, oh, they have so much tension in their kidneys. And they're like,
Wow.
oh, yeah, my adrenals are shot and this and that. I'm like, yeah, you've been in flight or fear all the time. When did that pattern begin? What's going on? And sometimes they're like, yeah, I've been struggling with kidney stones. I've been struggling with, I have like some kidney inflammatory condition now that I just got diagnosed with. So much fear for years will actually affect the function of the body. So if we're talking about anger, stress, usually get stuck in the liver. And of course, it can affect the other organs because we're one unit.
Right.
Anything going on in the body, the rest of the body is aware of it. So if
Yeah.
you start pounding the organ in an unhealthy way by asking it to hold way too much strain and tension, eventually, oh, hey, I got a blood test. My liver enzymes are off now. And the doctors are just like, well, yeah, we'll check it again in a few months. I know that they've been under a huge amount of stress, or I know that they've been having a lot of repressed anger that's been there long enough. Now it's physiologically affecting the organ. And now they have allergies and they are getting IBS and their guts don't feel right and they're not sleeping well. And you can just walk back through that whole chain of events. Because I kind of fancy
tells the
myself as an
story to you.
investigator,
Yeah.
Okay, where did each of these entry points happen? And then maybe we get through a bunch of layers in the first visit. Maybe we get down to that core, oh, this moment is something that deeply affected your nervous system, and then it never got addressed. And then that pattern just carried on. And 20 years later, they have some kind of autoimmune condition because I see that tons. It's on an exponential curve. And
Yeah, you see that a lot now.
yeah, it's not the body making a mistake. It's not the body attacking itself.
So right before I sat down to get some work done this afternoon, I experienced that classic afternoon crash. My energy was dropping and I could feel that my brain was sort of like, are we going to do this? And I don't drink caffeine very often anymore. I don't want to be dependent on it. I might have a coffee once a week. And the reason is I don't want to have to be like, oh, I need a coffee to get through this afternoon. I felt like that was just another form of addiction. And I like my body and my mind to be free from the necessity of things in order to show up and perform. And so one thing that I've done in order to replace coffee and still get energy and also nutrition is I've been taking Organifi red juice. It's got 13 superfoods. It's fully organic. It's got no caffeine, just 2 grams of sugar that come from freeze-dried berries. And so not only does it provide me with energy, but it's actually super delicious and super easy to make. You just In 30 seconds, you just open it up, mix it with some water, and drink it down. And as I said, it tastes so great. So if you want to save 20% off Red Juice, this sounds like it'd be a good fit for you if you're trying to kick coffee or whatever. Check it out. Go to Organifi.com/createthelove. And that's Organifi.com/createthelove. Go check it out. You save 20% on all the good stuff. I find so many things fascinating in the last while, especially the evolution of just my own life through the Western medicine model, and then learning about emotion and relationship and being like, well, that's pretty key to inflammation. And, and I know so many people whose autoimmune was triggered by a traumatic event, usually in their childhood.
For sure.
And when you talked about the suppression of emotion, like anger in the liver, Hillary Jacobs Handel wrote a book called Why It's Not Always Depression. And she talks about how the suppression of any of she breaks it down to 6 core emotions. And I'm sure people could come up with different ones, but for the sake of simplicity, she has 6 core emotions. And she says that if you block or suppress any one or more of those, what happens is we have an inhibitory emotion, like another one that inhibits us from getting to that one. And that's anxiety, guilt, or shame. And then if we then don't express and listen, it becomes depression. And of course, that makes so much sense. And I think of the same thing as also, if it's occurring in terms of expression, it's being held somewhere.
It's always in the body somewhere.
And is autoimmune, because then I think autoimmune is said to be the body attacking itself, right? As you said. And I'm like, well, if you're not expressing yourself, then you are literally attacking yourself on some level. Maybe that's not, you're not literally.
You could look at it that way.
Literally, the wrong use of the word literal, which I know drives people nuts now.
Well, take an example of, somebody maybe has low self-esteem, and they had a family growing up that reiterated that quite a bit or was really hard on them, and they just bottled all that energy up inside. Depending on their physiology and maybe their genetic makeup and everything else, if that's stacked up over a long enough period of time, you sprinkle in, a couple of bacterial infections over the years that then got treated with suppressive medication, which is pretty much all Western medicine, steroids, antibiotics. I'm glad that we have antibiotics on the planet. If I'm in the jungle and I get gangrene or something, I want hospital antibiotics.
So you're not negating that they're good when you need them.
Yeah, but not as a regular go-to use. If somebody's getting recurrent infections in their body, like strep throat or something all the time, there's an issue with their internal terrain. And the antibiotics tend to make it worse. In Chinese medicine, antibiotics are viewed as a cold toxin, which is then hard on the spleen and hard on the liver and hard on the kidneys. The kidneys don't like being cold. So it'll start to congest those filtering systems, which we actually need for health. So this is why things just get recurrent more and more. And then the more treatment that they might get that is suppressive, you can imagine that pressure starts pushing it deeper and deeper and deeper into the body, because the bacteria nowadays, it's so intelligent. It's going to morph and change way faster than what your body's going to do.
Peace out. I got this.
It's just almost like now it almost laughs, and somebody, has antibiotics for 2, 3 rounds, 4 rounds, and like, I still got this infection, and I can feel that bacterial infection in their body, just like, this is nothing. What else you got for me? I'm so robust now. But then it also gets deeper than it ever would before, because it's being pushed deeper. And the immune system starts to say, hey, what do you want me to do with this material? I got nowhere to go with this. That's when the autoimmune conditions start kicking in, because the immune system is like, no, we got to increase, all hands on deck. There's a problem here. We can't quite sort it out. Let's do that.
Interesting.
And it just keeps on putting more and more energy. And pretty soon they're like, oh, you got Hashimoto's, autoimmune condition of the thyroid. And people are like, my thyroid's shot. And I'm like, it's not your thyroid. Your poor thyroid has been asked to maybe work overtime because you've been working overtime at work for years. Your adrenals are shot. It's calling on the thyroid. I need more fuel. And pretty soon the thyroid's like, I'm so spent. And then they go to the doctor and say, oh, you got a thyroid condition. It's your thyroid that's causing all your problems. Think, poor thyroid, it's getting overlooked. It's like, what do you want me to do?
Yo, work's the problem. What the hell?
Like, you're going to have to give me some support. And then they take thyroid medication and everybody's happy for a little while thinking, oh, we've solved the problem. But they're not asking, why'd your thyroid crash? why did your immune system start attacking? It's like, oh, because maybe some bacteria got in there. Could be strep, Epstein-Barr. It gets stuck in that tissue, and you shove it in there deep enough, the organs are going to have something to say about it. They still have limits of what they are willing and not willing to do. So it's actually always just trying to sort itself out. The body doesn't make mistakes. We wouldn't be on the planet. We wouldn't have evolved to this state. It's like, oh, the body's attacking itself again. But too bad us. This is just something that randomly happens at a particular time of your life. It just turns on itself.
That's one of the things that's maybe pissed me off the most in the last 3 years is like all of a sudden now vaccination immunity is better than natural immunity. We now know that in hindsight, we knew in present time that was bullshit, but that was the marketing message that ushered the need for the vaccine. And then now we know natural immunity at least as robust. Right. I'm not saying anything that would have ever been controversial prior to pharma getting in charge of public health messaging. And the ignorance and the arrogance of people, is just so evident in our thought that we can outmaneuver or cure something that nature knows. Like nature's can shift, they can do an evolutionary shift in just the blink of an eye.
Absolutely.
And fix something.
Yeah.
Right? And we can't.
Yeah.
I can't even believe that that's what I just said is controversial.
Yeah.
Because if we're not emotional about things, that's actually just logical. If we just had data, okay, what's this say? Oh, that's obvious. But this seems to be the problem with just our circumstances culturally too.
Yeah.
Now, is we think we have the solution to fix everything. And the right way is the thing that man came up with, the one that you pay for. Shocking.
Yeah,
right?
shocking.
Shocking that the solution is this product or this thing. Because if you look, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, because if you look at sort of the industrialization of food, right? GMOs, you see the message of fat's bad, and then you see the ushering in of sugar to make up for flavor, but really sugar being
a drug
sold by manufacturers, a drug, addictive, causes the inflammatory cascade, hard on the liver.
Very hard on the liver. Your body's
quantity.
got to clear that out.
Right.
And then if you're giving it a lot of stuff to clear out every day, it's going to get tired.
Right.
Like it wants a break. So when you exceed the body's ability to keep up with something, that's where illness starts to happen. That's where the fatigue starts setting in because it's getting bogged down. So the amount of toxicity that we see nowadays, because there's a lot of toxins, I'm an optimistic person. And when I look around, I think that's a lot of toxins for the body to contend with, which is, I think, why we have to almost work harder and do more just to keep the status quo. That's why liver cleanses have become so popular. And doctors in the past would often say, you don't need to do that. Your liver knows how to do that. And it's like, true. But we also haven't lived in a time where there's so many pesticides and chemicals and everything we're taking in and in the water or the air and maybe through, technology and everything else. It's a lot, right? And
that's going to be the name of this podcast episode. Everything is fucked. I'm just kidding. I am optimistic because secretly fat's bad was a message that wasn't true. And now you see people now revolting against the no eating meat. Eat this fucking sludge Beyond Beef burger bullshit.
I don't think it's ever going to take off in Alberta, right? You've been in
Calgary.
I'm pretty sure they're going to keep that going.
But I don't think it's going to take off in general because when you look, I know lots of people who were militant vegans.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a vegan, this is not a judgment of people choose what you want to choose. I don't care. But it's like they eventually went back to eating meat. Every single one I know.
Interesting.
Or craves meat. And is talking about reintroducing it. And I know probably about 12 that were really assertive vegans. And now are start with fish and then they hit beef. And I tried to live as a vegetarian for 8 months. And I remember being at a taco party, which are the best kinds of parties. And there was a bowl of ground beef.
Oh, dangerous. Yeah.
Dude, and I was sitting there and all of a sudden, without even thinking about it, I had grabbed a spoon and was eating it.
You didn't put your face in it or anything?
Well, I didn't even realize I was eating it. And then I was eating it. And then when I got my blood chemistry done, I had low levels of vitamin A, I think it was, and what else would be in like B? I think it was B.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, oh, my body knew that I needed that more than I had the consciousness to not grab a spoon.
Yeah.
But I say all that because it's like we're at this place where all these systems, like fat's bad, here's sugar. We're not telling you we're giving you all this sugar. We're telling you bread. Like, look at the food pyramid. Holy fuck.
Isn't Fruit Loops on the food pyramid now? Have
It
you
was-
seen some of that?
Yeah, there
Frosted
was something.
Flakes
I
or
think it was like
something?
that was apparently like a misrepresented food thing, but yeah, that the nutritional value of Cheerios or something was better than beef, like grass-fed beef. It's like. But anyways, my point being that all these monetary profitable systems, and then, oh, look what happens when you eat a really inflammatory high carb sugar diet that is not nutrient dense.
Hmm.
Oh, you happen to get metabolic syndrome, which the combination of like diabetes, cardiovascular
All the
disease.
things. Yeah.
Right. Oh, guess what the treatment is for that? You're going to need an antihypertensive. You're going to need a statin, which the data's getting real crunchy on that one.
It is.
But you see all these solutions that don't actually deal with the root cause. And then it shows up, as you're saying, in all these systemic things, which statins are hard on the liver.
Super hard on the liver.
On the liver, right?
And the kidneys.
And the kidney.
And more.
Because they can cause rhabdo. But anyways, all of this to say, like, people now are starting to wake up to this because since the progress of medicine, we're definitely no more healthy. The last couple of years, I think the average age of life went down.
Yeah. And the amount of pharmaceutical intervention
autoimmune,
is through the roof.
Right.
I see it in my clinic. Kind of every autoimmune condition, which is now just everybody's getting lumped into that. If they don't know what's going on with you, they mean, oh, it's some kind of autoimmune condition. I'm seeing autoimmune
ADHD,
blood conditions now,
ADD.
Of course. And yeah, the mental aspect, the nervous system. And it seems like we've just become so disconnected from our nature, whereas like you knew you needed the ground beef in that moment. And I say to my patients with supplements and things like, don't just take the same thing every day. Trust what your body has to say, and I'll try and help them get more connected to their own nature. And you could say autoimmunity is maybe in that connection as well, that they become disconnected from what's really good for them in life or what's really aligned for them, whether that's work or relationships or how they feel towards themselves. There's a disconnect there somewhere. And then the body is communicating, I need more connection somewhere in here. There has to be more connection. Where have you disconnected from yourself? What you truly want, what you truly feel, or what you're feeling maybe gets shoved so far deeply into your body, you don't even know how you're feeling anymore. And then that leaves a lot of space for things to start coming in. Bacteria, infections, whenever somebody's in a recurrent cycle like that, there's a pattern that's going on. So I'm often trying to help people get back in touch with their own nature. Your body will tell you, yeah, I want to eat that or I don't want to eat that. And I'm not talking about cravings. I'm talking about that deep body wisdom.
Like the deep knowing.
I don't need this supplement today. I need this, or I want to eat that. And that's how we would have been for many, many years, is we needed to use our instincts in nature, because if you ate a poison plant, then that was a problem.
You were done.
So maybe you taste it, maybe you smell it. You kind of feel it's like something doesn't feel right. I'm out. And we can do that with places, with people, homes. You walk into a home, you're looking to buy something. It's like, it doesn't feel right. You don't need to understand why. We want to understand why logically, because the brain's been so championed, and I'm grateful for our brains. But I think we're moving into an age where we're coming back to trusting that deeper energy.
Right. Coming back to heart, coming back to intuition, because we've created so much of the championship of logic.
Yeah.
I remember hearing, I think it's Ram Dass who said that the professor became the high priest. And it's so true. Like the one, I think the most watched TED Talk of all time is called Our School is Ruining Our Creativity by Sir Ken Robinson. And it's so good. But he said that education became, we teach from the neck up.
Yeah.
And I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in school, and I can say, yeah, that was absolutely true. Like dance, not existent. Now I think of I couldn't imagine being in school today, like being in elementary or junior high. Like it's just so different. And my heart goes out to them, and especially how much information is available and how much we actually, as a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old, shouldn't even be participating in some conversations that we're participating in, because our brain's not developed to even be able to hold some we're getting answers to questions we don't ask, and that's I mean, that's a whole other podcast. But at this point, when you think of this shift or this return to the
Hmm.
heart, which I totally agree. I feel like some of us are going to go towards the singularity and others of us are going to return to the earth. And I feel like there is going to be a revolution, an analog revolution, maybe many other revolutions, but I do feel like people are going to get overexhausted from technology and want to come back to this.
Well, the pendulum swings, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like it's swung so far with technology and like way too much stimulus for what our brains and our nervous systems can, balance in a healthy way, that there is this return. And even where I live now, in beautiful Okanagan in BC, yeah, COVID helped that movement for a lot of getting back on farms and land and growing food. And you saw a lot of people leave the cities. And I think they started to feel that return, maybe not because they had a premonition one day, but kind of forced to. It's like, we don't want to do what we're doing anymore. It's not sustainable. We've become disconnected. And people are wanting to come back to, I think, their bodies, where their food comes from, being on the land, running around and, bare feet and being
Yeah.
in the forest. So a lot of my patients, I do see that. And, I see a specific subset of the population. And a lot of the conversations are now about that, because I'm looking at what they're doing in their life that has contributed to their illness, and often change needs to happen. And it often is, yeah, coming back to the body, back to the heart. And this revolution, I feel that coming. And I'm a Gene Keys fan, and
Oh, I
Richard
love
Rudd
Gene
and
Keys. Yeah.
Human Design.
Yeah.
They talk about 2027, the solar plexus mutation of humanity, and that's where we're coming more out of the mental plane, and we're going into the solar plexus, gut, intuition, energy, feeling, emotion. And I feel like a lot of us have been feeling that for years. I don't think it's going to be one random day in 2027 where everything just suddenly, maybe it will be that way. I'm not sure, but our bodies are going through these beautiful genetic mutations to bring us into a higher frequency, to bring us into a space where we can come back to feeling and discerning energy. Watch animals. They know. They can sense energy, they can read energy. You can't say that we can't do that.
Right.
We have this inside us. I think it's just been forgotten or covered up, or, all the distractions that we have around us keep you from connecting to your own truth of, what do I feel? And what do I need to speak about? What do I need to share? How do I want to show up? And where's it coming from? Is it coming from my head or my heart? And so as we come into alignment with more of those pieces, then the conversations change. The health changes the body. Your body's like, oh yeah, that's better. You can feel it coming out of the head.
It makes so much sense because if you go on a trip to, let's say, Italy or Tofino or whatever, and your body's all of a sudden like, holy, I just feel so relaxed. I feel so at peace. And then you go back to
Yeah,
where you're from, and all of a sudden you're back in your work that you hate. You're back in your relationship that you feel disconnected from. You're back in, maybe surrounding yourself with people who don't live the values that you hope to live. And it just naturally makes sense. There's that saying that if a plant is wilting or dying, you don't blame the plant. You look at the environment.
absolutely.
That is not radical.
It seems like it's radical based on the bigger paradigm, but it's common sense, like we talked about. It's
Yeah.
just practical. And I use an example like that often with patients. We have a little fish tank in our office. There's a little fish in there. If that fish starts having issues, you don't blame the fish either. It's like, maybe the idea would be, you just take that one out, put a new one in. If it died or gets
Right.
fin rot or something, yep, just toss
Plop
it.
in a new one.
Boom,
That's-
new
yeah.
one. And the question I often ask is like, did anybody check the water? And we can do that for our bodies and our lives. We have our inner environment and we have our external environment, and that will completely dictate what is going on with our bodies, our minds, and our health, and whether it's really in alignment, we're full of vitality, or we're not. And so check the water in your life. What's the pH in there? What's the bacterial count? There's got to be something that could shift, and then you can bring that fish back to full health if you create an environment that's conducive to life that way.
At the core of most of, or actually, is it all? At the core of most or all of the things that you present at your office, do they come back to connection? Like, do they come back generally to their relationships?
I think that a lot of patients in the past, if they're working with me, I know things are going to change. And that's something that gets me out of bed in the morning. I love creating change and transformation and creating a shift. So if somebody's in my presence, I know that they're there for a reason. And I have that intention every morning of like, what am I doing here?
Mm.
Why am I here today? I'm here to create change and transformation for the highest capacity for whoever's sitting with me. And then we'll go to those depths. And I understand, like, not everybody wants to do that work. It can
Yeah.
be really hard. The people that are ready, though, you see them make big shifts in huge areas of their life that are really important. And it's funny, sometimes they'll come back. It's been 6 or 8 weeks and they're like, well, I left my relationship and I quit my job and I did this and that. I'm like, whoa, you just take a breath. Like, is this healthy? And then as maybe we unpack it, it is really healthy. And they might say, I've never felt more aligned in my life. Thanks for helping me get back to me. I forgot. I kind of fell asleep at the wheel and I just woke up one day and was like, none of this is working. And of course, we don't have to throw everything out, but there's usually some changes that need to happen. And it can be really scary facing that. But we can do that together. We can get support. You can listen to books. You can get on podcasts. There's data available and there's advice available. But really, it's about trusting yourself. What's right for me, regardless of what everybody else may say. If you are coming back into connection with yourself, you'll know. And when you know, your body's like, thank goodness they're listening, they got it. And then it starts reorganizing its cells and the genetic expressions to be more healthy and more vital. And I think that's the good news of looking at this in an optimistic way, despite all the toxins and all the things that we're exposed to. Our body is so badass that it can transform anything. If you're starting to increase your frequency, if you're increasing your energy and your vitality, it'll clear things that you could never imagine. And then there's a new expression coming through and there's new ideas that, get sparked and you create something in the world and you quit your job maybe, or you do your job better because you're happier.
I think when people hear something like the word frequency, they're like, okay, let's calm down on the metaphysical, right?
Totally.
I agree with you. And I like to translate that into the way we are taught to see the world, which is that if you step out of toxic patterns, relationally, which means self, because you're participating in them, you change the way you eat, you start to move towards a nutrient dense diet. What you said, get to know your body, get to know your intuition. All those are the same thing. Like, you can't step into nutrition and nourishment food wise and then not see toxicity relationally. Just like if you start to choose healthy movement patterns for your body, you'll start to be like, well, now I need to eat more because my body's saying I need more nourishment. And then you start to say, okay, well, in my relationships, I'm going to start to change my patterns too. Like you said, in the body, one organ knows, all the organs know when one's not functioning. The same thing is very true of our external environment. If you get healthy in the way you connect to self, you can't fucking stay in toxic connection anymore.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Right. And if you stay in toxic connection or toxic patterns in all these other areas, you then are now in a toxic relationship with self, And so I think about that of like that language of frequency, yes. And just on a literal sense, the patterns that you change and choose will get lighter, like your life will be experienced as more vitality. Your energy flowing through your body will change. The energy you're exchanging with other people, the way you communicate is no longer, let's say, dense and filled with lots of conflict. Well, high conflict relationships is correlated to inflammation. So all of a sudden you're less inflamed. So it's like a lot of people will throw out information because they hear frequency.
Yeah.
But frequency is just a way of naming. It's speaking to an energy, but it's also naming on what sort of hierarchy, which is not shame-based or judgment, but the hierarchy of the energy that's moving through us and the experiences we're having in our life. Like, I don't think there's any argument that the experience you have sitting in the rainforest in Tofino is different than sitting at an intersection in the center of Manhattan. Right? Like, we know, and we could say, well, the frequency is different.
Yeah.
I'm sure some people are like, fucking Manhattan. Fuck yeah. That was a horrible New York accent. But when you see people coming back to these connections, How do you see it because I'm really fascinated about what you talk about in the energy of the heart. And I think for people they're like, okay, wait, how does this impact my actual heart and the energy center?
It's funny, right? Because I grew up in small town, rural Alberta. The vocabulary that I use now is very different than what I was taught. I'm not saying it's good or bad. So I'm so used to saying things like frequency or energy now. But if I look back 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that wasn't really part of my vocabulary at all. And, sound is a good one, or sound healing has become really popular now. That's just frequency. And I love music. Music can change your state and it can change your mood.
Amazing, right?
And sometimes music has helped me process huge amounts of grief because you put on that one song that you put, 2 seconds in and you're just, the tears are flowing.
Totally.
And then there's other ones that get you pumped up and you're just so joyous and happy and on the open road on a road trip or whatever. To me, that's just frequency. You're tuning into something that affects your state. And if you hang out with somebody that consistently brings you down, that lowers your energy, or you could say, sure, it lowers your frequency, but maybe you were friends for a long time. And after each visit, you're drained and you're super tired. Your frequencies drop. That's all it is.
Right.
And if you hang out with somebody and it's co-creative and exciting and you're both energized after, that's beautiful energy. You've helped elevate each other. And I think that's what we're often looking for in relationships, whether it's friends or coworkers, that both people benefit from being together. That you
Shocking.
can, right?
Yeah.
You can elevate frequency, or you can just elevate your mood or energy. And all these words, I think, are interchangeable. So when we come back to the heart, the frequency, and they can track this now with like heart math and heart coherence, HRV. You can tell what's going on in your mind and your heart and if things are flowing or not. And if you're off, if it's like disruptive or incoherent, you'll see that show up in the data because we have technology to track that now. So whether you call that, frequency or energy, it's all starting to, morph together into a better understood idea of how much the body carries and how much capacity we have. So the heart in Chinese medicine, they call it the Shen, which is spirit. And so that belief of like, our heart houses our soul or our spirit. And I started doing heart-based retreats years ago with a dear friend of mine, a colleague, Courtney, and we called it Collective Hearts.
Mm.
And one of the reasons is because we were talking about collaborating, and I asked her, what are you seeing in your practice? What am I seeing in my practice at the time? Everything seems to come back to the heart, like the emotions of whatever somebody's experiencing in their life. So I thought, why don't we do a retreat that's specifically focused on the heart? And let's get in there and see what is somebody holding, because we can hold so much there.
Mm-hmm.
You think of all the heartbreaks somebody's been through, the highs and the lows of life, and they're now, with new data and technology, we have memory. We have long-term memory in our heart. We have neurons. We have so many things at our heart that it is more than just what they would used to say as a mechanical pump. It just pumps the blood. It is,
again, more of that.
Yeah, so far beyond that. And, when we come into that heart coherence, everything functions better in our body. That's like, for the pun, that's the heart of everything in your system. Everything returns here and everything kind of gets expressed through here. So we live in the heart. I know it sounds metaphorical, but I think that's just paying attention to your body and listening to the intuitions you have, or listening to that voice inside that is telling you or nudging you to move in a particular direction. Sometimes it's subtle, but if we listen, we get still, it's there.
Yeah, I think it starts subtle. Then the message is like, hey, pay attention. But I would joke about this, although I've experienced them and they're not funny, which is it goes from like the subtle nudge to the cosmic 2x4, to the cosmic dump truck, where you have to listen. And I think because it's so normalized to, as you were saying earlier about being disconnected from intuition, it's so normalized that when we start to journey back to intuition and start to journey back to knowing, start to journey back to listening to the nudges that have been there all along, but we usually wait till there's a rock bottom or like where we can't go any further down the path that we've been trudging in. And I think, unfortunately, that's actually normal. I think it's normal to completely, it's monetizable. Right? Like that's what sells us all this materialism. That's what says, hey, you know what? You need to Botox everything. You're not enough. You need to be younger. You need to be, and I know there's so many cultural messages that participate in all these things. So I'm not judging them, and I'm not judging anyone's choice. But I'm saying, like, there's money to be made from misalignment. There's money to be made from not listening to your intuition, because if you don't listen to your intuition and you continue staying in relationships and patterns that are unhealthy, you're going to need to soothe the pain of the knowing that you're doing things that are unhealthy. I think
It's the pain, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Gabor Mate says the wrong question is why the addiction, the right question is why the pain. And I think we mostly look at life from why the addiction or why the thing, and not what are we trying to not acknowledge.
I think that's why we don't go there, and diving into the heart. You don't know what you're going to find there necessarily, because there's probably
Yeah.
a lot of pain.
Yeah.
The heartbreak that you didn't deal with, you got cut from a team, you didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve, or that self kind of deprecating energy that sometimes can happen. And when you have that depth in your heart, when you start traveling into that space, it can be, it's like the journey to the center of the universe, or the center of the earth. You're going to find all kinds of layers in there. You might find layers of grief and sadness that were unprocessed, and you'll need to move through those to then get to that next layer. But that's hard. It's painful sometimes, and I'm sure
Scary.
you felt it too, as a masculine presence where we are in touch with our emotions. I've cried more in the last 5 years than I have in my whole life. And depending on the lens somebody would look at it, like, that guy's unstable. And I feel more connected to my heart than I ever have before, because I'm in connection with it now.
Yeah.
More than ever. And I might find things that were childhood or unexpressed that have actually been affecting my body. But what happens is we process that. We get some support, we get some help, whatever. It's on a retreat with you, or listen to podcasts. It triggers something that moves that energy, and we have a good cry, or whatever it is. We have a soul conversation with a friend. Suddenly we've liberated more energy that's been walled off to us, because it's been disconnected. We come back into a little bit more connection. Suddenly we're like plugged into that voltage a little bit more of life force energy.
Yeah.
And then we come up a little bit more. It's a little bit easier getting out of bed, because that thing that was dragging, that maybe was creating depression, is just that heavy energy that now has been listened to or processed in some way. And then we go deeper, and I find all kinds of stuff in here,
Dude, me too.
And it's an incredible
It's never
journey,
ending.
but you got to be courageous to face that stuff, because it might not be easy, but worth it.
Yeah, the first journey of facing unmet or acknowledged emotion can feel overwhelming. I think that's often what makes us stop or go back to previous behaviors and addictions. Is because maybe we don't have the community, maybe we don't have the support, that idea that we're not well resourced enough yet.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the parts, I remember when Kylie and I broke up for a while and it was over. I remember a couple weeks after I rented a cabin in Mount Baker, Washington, which by
Beautiful.
yourself, it was a great idea.
You and the bears.
Just me hanging out there. And I remember just talking to a friend and him saying, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No." And I just started crying. And he got in a car and came. And it's like, I didn't need anything more than him actually being in a chair beside me, because what that did for me is it was like a tether to the world.
Yeah.
Like, I was afraid I was going to be swallowed up by grief. And he was like this hand that was just like, "I got you. Like, you go, but I'll swim. I'll fish you out if you need it." And we didn't have that conversation, but that's what was happening. And it was, I consider it such a blessing. And we need to be resourced like that. We need to be able to say to a friend, like, "I need you right now." And what you said about the more you've gotten to know it, the more tears you've shed, the more, and I feel the same way. Like, now I feel whole, and I'm sure I'll keep expanding in terms of what I'm aware of, what I'm capable of, my ability to have empathy, compassion, clean anger, all that kind of stuff. But it's like, as I discover more of my emotionality, there's a grief that I haven't lived it till now.
I think that's why there's been so many tears in the last few years for me, even though I would say I feel more aligned and more on purpose than at any time in my life. And it's this interesting paradox. It's like, but I cry more.
Right.
But I also think
Right.
it's like years of not crying when I should have,
Yeah.
years of that
Same.
layer in the system of, oh, now I'm okay enough like I'm in alignment enough, which is why all this emotion is coming up. So some people feel like, oh, I'm a mess lately. And like it could also be actually because you're doing well. That the safety and the wisdom of your body is like, thank goodness now we can start processing some of this stuff, because there's no way we could have done that before.
Right.
But we're actually resourced enough, or we feel safe enough. Let's let it start coming through. So often when I start working with somebody and we start detoxing and clearing bacteria and all these different areas of the body, I'm like, oh, by the way, on this remedy I've given you, you might feel a lot of emotion, and you may not know where it comes from, but it's going to be there. You'll get a memory, or you'll see a scene in your mind that you haven't thought about for 20 years, because I'm clearing your liver, and that's where it's maybe been stored for you. And then it comes to the surface, and I've taken a lot of my own remedies, and I'll be on a remedy for 2-3 days, and I'm waking up in the morning like anxious and feeling so much sadness. And I'm like, what's happening here? What is this? There's nothing that happened. And I feel like, oh, that was 10 years ago when you felt like so let down by people close to you, or you weren't met. There was something there. And then I let it come through in that moment, because maybe I couldn't then. I was too disconnected to actually feel through. So I just filed it in the back. And even as you're sharing, those moments, going through breakups or different things where you feel like your heart's just kind of being shredded in some way, your friend asking you from the heart is like, are you okay? It's not even the words necessarily. It's you feel his heart and he can feel yours. And I think sometimes as guys, it's hard to not be okay, because we've been trained as like, no, I'm good.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, on that edge of, I actually don't really feel okay right now. And that's scary to me, because I'm always in control, or I've got this dialed in. And so for me, the last few years, like opening up that space a bit more is, what if I wasn't okay for the next hour or two? What would happen? What would come through? I might cry a lot. And what would that bring me? Well, it might bring some integration or some resolution from something that's been unprocessed. Well, what would that do? Probably bring me more energy the next day, more clarity, more focus.
That's interesting, because it
more
unblocks
creativity.
the.
It unblocks so much energy. And in
I've
Chinese
felt that.
medicine, it's obstructive energy that, one of my teachers said, if something's moving, that's good. If something's not moving, that's no good. And so it gets things moving.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
When you were talking about music and words that elicit or access emotion, there's a saying that you can read a book, you can understand a book without understanding a book. Like you can read it, but and not know it, but you're consuming it at the energy it was written in, which I find that's such an interesting. And I found that when I read certain books, like when I listen to certain teachers, I found that whenever I read excerpts from Women Who Run with Wolves, which that book is written for women, but I find myself I think every woman should read that book, and every person should read that book. Every man should read that book, because whenever I read it, I'm just like, wow, how this was written is written in a power that like accesses something within you, which you said about music too, or someone saying to you, are you okay? There's a frequency that gets opened or accessed. Like when you read about a breakup or someone's resolve or someone's path, you're like, oh, they're putting into words what is stuck within me. And that's why I find when someone says, I want to share my story, or I want to do, I'm like, start, because when I was afraid to start, I had a coach who said to me, how arrogant of you to believe that your message is for you. And he said, every day that you don't start, you actually are not there for the person who needs to hear what you have to say.
That's powerful.
Ooh, it like rocked me, because I saw that my fear was holding me back from actually first releasing what needed to be expelled, and following the purpose that I was being called towards, but also that it wasn't about me. And I think that's if you're listening and you're like, I want to share something, I want to create a podcast, or I want to start a YouTube, or I want to just fucking start, because like you're qualified to walk anyone down a path you've walked. There's a lot of people who are academic experts on things they've never done.
Yeah.
And I'm not negating academic expertise, but there's a lot of people who are experts in things who don't actually live what they know. They're
I think that's
completely
more
out
the
of
mind,
alignment,
right? That's not really the heart. Perhaps that's what's, drawn me here today as well, is you live in the heart as well. And it's not always an easy path. They say it's not for the faint-hearted to live the heart path.
Now all these sayings are making sense.
Yeah. But you gotta move through those pieces so that when we're talking, it's coming from that deeper place of, I know what that feels like because I've been there, I've done that. And then we can resonate with each other in a new way. And, really looking at life, a lot of what you're sharing is kind of bringing up that notion of, I don't want to sit on the stands in my life. I'd rather be on the playing field, even if it's hard or chaotic or challenging. By the end of, this life, whenever that is, I want to look back and think, I was on the playing field though. And I was really in it because I did sit on the stands, I think, a lot in my own life for years because, I was.
And I didn't even know I was on the stands.
Yeah.
Until I got off of it, I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
That you said earlier something that resonated with me where, when I quote unquote woke up, which was really that I, for the first time in my life, started asking the question, why do I do what I do? How did I get here? And I didn't realize I was so disconnected from myself. You were talking about the journey back. I remember, and it still happens, right? Like I still am like, oh, there's still a part of me on the stands. And that journey back, you used the word alignment about how patients, when they start to leave the relationship, start a relationship, have a conversation, leave the job, start work, they never feel more aligned. And I remember when I left a relationship in my late 20s, I never felt more aligned. And that was in contrast that I'd hurt someone too. And so that was hard to process because I didn't know that alignment also sometimes came at the cost of relationship, or it meant people got hurt. But living a life out of alignment in order to make it so no feelings are ever felt by anybody is just, it's not even practical. It seems to me like the path to disease.
That does lead to illness because if you're in a scenario within yourself where it feels like you can't win, where you're just so stuck and, needing people's approval or whatever. And I spent a lot of time doing that. And that's still present in my life at times, right?
Is the recovery group starting with hi, I'm Mark. I'm recovering.
And realizing that was in me, that I was leading most of my actions trying to get approval from anybody around me, and then realizing the futility of that and the pain that I was creating in myself of, I'm never going to win. Somebody is always going to be unhappy with something. You pick any topic. Do you agree with me? Yep. Do you? Nope.
I hate you. I love you.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the same sentence, it's going to be received very differently. And so trying to manage the world around me of meeting everybody's approval, my staff, my coworkers, my relationships, patients, chances are like that's impossible for one. So I was fighting an impossible battle that I didn't even really realize, but I was starting to feel frustrated, exhausted, and you're like, you're kind of abandoning yourself. And that's where we start feeling the deeper pain is the disconnect. I think some of the most pain is where you realize you've let yourself down.
Yeah.
And then, feeling through those of, oh man, I abandoned myself. And there's times when I'm like sitting there crying, apologizing to that previous version of Kev. It's like, I'm sorry I left you hanging, buddy. Like, I'm never going to do that again. I'm with you now. And I may have moments, but I'm not going anywhere this time. And I think that's that wholeness that you're speaking to, is the awareness that that's there. And then making sure we're gathering all of us is like, let's all move forward together. I'm not leaving anybody behind here again to make somebody else happy, even though it's really hard at times still. But that's the heart journey. If we can stay in it, it's not always comfortable. And I think that's a notion because, I do spiritual healing and retreats and all these things, that it's going to be easy and glorious and like blissful the whole time. And most often it's I look around, the whole room's crying, I'm leading breathwork, so I'm like, all right, we're in it. We're in the heart now. And they're looking at me like, what's up, dude? Like, this doesn't feel good at all. But then it gets to that point where then they're like, oh, I feel free now. I didn't realize I was holding that. And we had to go through that jungle, go through the journey to come to the other side. And then you're more liberated, and then you realize how disconnected you were, which again starts that pathway further. And I think as humanity, that's what is really going on in the collective, I feel like. And people they know that that's there, I guess. Like they can feel it. They may not know what they're feeling, or even as they're listening to this, it might be pulling on these parts of them that are uncomfortable, or they're not really sure, like they're not connecting it logically yet, like in their mind. It's probably your heart just speaking to you saying, hey, let's look in here. We've got some stuff to
We've
clear.
got some things to explore. Breath work is so powerful in that space because I find too with Kundalini, which has a similar sort of incessant. I remember going to a Kundalini class where the guy said, Kundalini will first piss you off and then break you open because
Yes.
you're moving your fucking shoulders for 18 minutes. You think they're going to fall off, and then you have the transformation. And the same with breath work. You're like 26 minutes in, you're like, I can't keep breathing in this pattern. And then all of a sudden you're in another dimension and emotions moving through you. And it's such powerful modality. And you're right. People are like, this is hard. But when you see people's eyes after they've been through that cry or that process that they're doing in breath work or Kundalini or even just by expressing,
Yeah.
there's a clarity.
So much clarity.
Oh my gosh,
That's
you
where
can
the
see
spirit
it.
is. They actually say that in Chinese medicine. The eyes, there's a lot of sayings, right? The eyes are the window to the soul, but there's an element that you can see the Shen, you can see the spirit through the eyes. And I see that shift in patients all the time. When they come in and they sit down and they look at me, I'm like, oh, they're feeling way better. And then they tell me all the things that are going on, but you can notice it in the eyes for sure. It's that brightness comes back, that shimmer of, oh, there's life in this person again. They've uncovered or they've, cleared some of these things. And, it's funny with breath work, you kind of hate it before you love it. Shout out to a lot of the crew back at home there. They started a hashtag called FK, which is hashtag fucking Kevin. And one of the reasons is because I give them remedies or I ask these questions and it's hard. It's uncomfortable because I'm getting them to go to these places that are really uncomfortable. So they started blaming me for all kinds of like funny things. Like it was lighthearted, like it's raining today. FK, that guy's
Kevin.
doing it. And then they made toques and they gifted me with a toque.
That's a beanie for Americans. So
That's right. Hashtag FK. I'm like, what's this? And they told me they had this whole thing going without me knowing. And it's like, it's because everybody cries, and you're getting in there. But to me, that's also the heart. So it's a beautiful compliment. But, I want to get in there, though, because I want results. I really want to help people. And sometimes you got to go through the hard stuff to get to the other side.
Well, I think by being in community and other people who are living that and being that, that's what I think. If someone's drawn to someone's work or their expression or how they live their life, go consume everything they have because we start to emulate them. We start to download the way they talk, the way they speak. Nothing's wrong with that. That's actually how you learn communication patterns is by modeling. We naturally do it anyways to build rapport. Like we mirror each other, we pace at the same pace of speech. But when we immerse ourselves with other people, what I remember the first time I went to a positive psychology conference. And then I went to a conference called the Awesomeness Fest that was with Mind Valley.
Yeah.
And then went to one that's called the Psych Networker, which is like all therapists. And at each one of those conferences, what I loved was that I finally felt like I wasn't crazy.
Yes.
The first time I went to a conference like the Positive Psych one and then the Awesomeness Fest, I would remember being like, oh my God, other people who are obsessed with understanding. And then you realize the narrative or idea that I'm different, so there must be something wrong with me now, versus, oh, I'm just like thinking all these people around me who think differently, that I don't fit in.
Yeah.
We just think differently. So then we find other people or we have different passions or whatever it is. And then you get to around other people and you're like, oh, they want that. Because I think one of the most challenging things that people tend to live their life not moving through is this idea that I really want big love, or I really want a big life, or I really want to grow and change and I want to do that with someone.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't want to do that. Okay, they're allowed to not want to do that. And that actually doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. And I think that's a challenge. It's trying to force that shit.
Oh yeah. I definitely did that.
I have done that. Yeah.
Many times, and just finally surrendering and letting go of like, oh, their path is not my path.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I was trying to get them to be on my path and like, here, let's go this way. And then I realized like, wait, I don't need to force this. This actually isn't healthy for them. let them be them, let me be me. And yeah, being in rooms. And that's one of the reasons I love doing events and retreats is you see
Same.
like the soul family people coming
Yeah.
together and they realize they're not the crazy one necessarily
It's a
in their
bunch of
family.
black
And
sheep, a bunch of
100%.
crazies. Yeah.
And that camaraderie, but then that builds beautiful connection and energy. And suddenly you can unlock healing that maybe wouldn't be unlocked for the groups of people that are there, that they wouldn't get to that on their own necessarily. Like it takes
Agreed.
those other
There's
people on
almost
the
like
same
a
wavelength.
psychological and somatic safety
Yeah.
that occurs because now it's like I can be vulnerable about these things because all these other people are taking courageous leaps of vulnerability. That's why sharing a story, even in a group, you might have someone who never shares what they're going through, who experiences complete transformation because they're witnessing other people's transformations,
Yeah.
which is so powerful.
So powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you have an event coming up too.
We
You want
do.
to tell us about it?
I'd love to. Yeah, the new human is the name that came through. I was meditating one day thinking about this event, and this is what it wants to be called. And it does speak to, I think, a lot of things that we're talking about already is where we're going as humanity, or where we could go as humanity, coming back into the hearts and looking at how do we want to feel day to day, and can we get out of our heads a little bit more, and can we in this event like pull together a group of like-minded, heart-centered people that are interested in things we're interested in growth, interested in maybe diving in to discover what's inside, even if it's going to be challenging, because we're all going to be there supporting each other. And then going through processes and exercises and breath work and meditation to unlock what has been stuck. And you might not even know what's stuck there, but we'll find something. And it'll, even if you feel like you're aligned, you're on your path, you're doing the things, you're happy, there's always more for us. And so we can unlock things collectively together by bringing that energy together into a powerful space, powerful room at a time where there's so much change happening. And that's something that lights me up, is to bring a lot of people together under one roof like that are wanting to move in the same direction. That momentum can carry you further. It's like the surfing. It's like the wave.
Yeah.
That energy wave will kind of do it. And finally, you find yourself just thriving and unlocking and finding things about yourself that you never imagined before. And at the end of the day, because I'm results focused, it is healing. And that's what I want to create. That's why we're pulling all these pieces together. And that's why we're having you come and join us. We're so excited.
I'm so pumped, man.
And
it's in Enderby.
Enderby, BC, another small town.
Which everyone needs to check. That interior part of BC is just, it's so incredible.
So beautiful. We're so blessed there. There's a lot of energy there too.
Yes.
The lakes, the mountains, the rivers. There's something special. There's a lot of healers and practitioners and, spiritual seekers, I suppose, coming into the Vernon area, coming into the Okanagan more and more. And also people that just want to connect in beautiful nature because they feel better. They feel healthier. They feel more revitalized there. So yeah, it feels like the right place to be.
Yeah. So it's, for people listening, I'm going to be speaking there as well. And I'm going to be there all weekend. It's June 9th to 12th.
Yeah.
Where they want to find out more information, where do they go?
So they can go to my website, drkevinpreston.com, Dr. Kevin Preston. That's my Instagram as well. And so, we're doing like full day Saturday, full day Sunday, June 10th and the 11th. And, we got a bunch of special crew stuff that we'll be doing, setting up the night before. And then we've got a lot of layers built into this event. We've been building this for 6-7 months already. As you know, it takes a lot of work behind the scenes. But we keep building those layers in. So by the time you're there, anybody that's going to join us, you're going to feel that safety and that energy to be able to go deeper than maybe you have before. And then offering different tools, different modalities, different voices. And that heart energy is going to be carried throughout the whole event, though. And really excited.
Oh, shit. It's going to be epic. And I always tell people, like, follow that intuitive call. Like, if you're like, I want to know more, get to know more, and then sign up. Because I can't wait to see everyone there.
Yeah, me too.
Brother, thanks for coming. Thanks for making the trip to Vegas to have this conversation. It means so much to me. And I was so excited to have you on because we have so many similar ways of seeing things, but you have such a deeper knowledge of the physiology. And I really wanted to get into the correlation of all the things for the people listening to connect the dots. And also, thanks for putting on the new human. I'm really pumped to be there. Where can people find more of you? I know you said Dr. Kevin Preston on Instagram, also your website, which is where your events are. We'll make sure we put those in the show notes. if people want to work with you or consult with you, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's the best way to find me because we do other private events, and I've done one-on-one deep dive retreats. We take somebody into the wilderness for 3-4 days, and I love those too. And I love working with the bigger groups, so we get variety, but that heart energy, is always present. And yeah, if somebody's feeling the call, then reach out. It's easy to find us, and yeah, we'll get you where you need to be.
Dude, amazing. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.